So for the next parts of the review session, we're actually just going to be going over material from the course. So in part 2, we're going to talk about the earliest material, starting with the basic question, what is politics? Politics is the process through which individuals and groups reach agreement on a course of common or collective action, even as they disagree on the intended goals of that action. All right, so obviously this definition stresses the idea of collective action, and that we don't necessarily all have to agree on the same goal to actually partake in collective action. Another good definition of politics is just the study of who gets what, why, and when. Now, why government? Right? This course is on the American government, but why do we have a government? Why don't we just live, in some sort of communal society without a central government? Well, as it turns out, government is often necessary to solve collective action problems, such as coordination problems, right? This is when members of a group must decide what they individually want and what they are prepared to contribute to the collective enterprise, and then how to coordinate their efforts for individual desire and collective good with the efforts of other people in the group. Now we also have collective action problems like prisoner's dilemma. This arises whenever individuals decide that even though they should be supporting some collective undertaking, they personally are a bit better off pursuing an activity that rewards them individually, even though it undermines the collective effort. Right? So basically, in a prisoner's dilemma, even though the collective good might be the best for you, you can't really be sure that everyone's going to pursue that, because pursuing individual selfish ends may still get you something you really want, and if the other person or other people involved also get what they want by pursuing selfish means, but you don't get what you want if they pursue their selfish goals, and they don't get what they want if you pursue yours, it's very hard to get people to agree to work together. You'd rather sort of not take as much risk and just get what you want. Right? And this is because, at least in a classic prisoner's dilemma, you cannot communicate with the other person in order to coordinate. So logically, if you act rationally and try to maximize your benefit while minimizing your cost, you actually all end up with a worse outcome than if you just cooperated in the first place. And government can help create structures that allow us to communicate or for other reasons to cooperate. Obviously, we've talked about the tragedy of the commons as a collective action problem quite a bit. And now that we've seen policy and discussed common goods, we can understand this even a little bit better, right? In the tragedy of the commons, everyone can communicate, unlike in prisoners' dilemmas, but we still end up in a situation where a common or collective resource is overused to ruination, right? So we all selfishly overuse something until it is ruined. This is why it's important that we're talking about common goods, right? Because they are subtractable, but they are not excludable. So you can't stop me from using it, but my using it can actually subtract from the overall commons and how much you can then use it. Oftentimes, tragedy of the commons are linked with the problem of free riders, right? Free riders get something for nothing. We generally want to eliminate free riders because they indicate a market failure, right? So it's actually typically quite a conservative ideology, aligned with conservative ideology to eliminate free riders because it's helping to perfect the market. Now, how do we eliminate free riders? How do we fix the tragedy of the commons or prisoner's dilemma? How do we solve coordination problems? Oftentimes with government, with some sort of powerful thing coming in and telling us how to fix it. Now, When I say telling us, they have lots of different ways other than command telling us, right? Though we certainly see command solutions when we talk about things like the Affordable Care Act and the individual mandate in order to eliminate free riders. We can see all sorts of different methods that the government can use to solve these problems. Rules and regulations, right? They can set up guidelines for how a common good can be used or for how something must get done in order to coordinate action, right? The filibuster in the Senate only can delay lawmaking. It basically stops the process, thus obviously causing a coordination problem. So there is a rule, the cloture rule, that limits debate if 3/5 of the Senate go along with it. Now, I know a lot of you on your midterms wrote 2/3. I'm assuming this is because you all referenced the Senate.gov website's page on filibusters and did not read the entire article. The article at the beginning says the cloture rule was required a 2/3 majority. However, if you read all the way to the end, you would note that the article then said that this had been changed relatively recently, and it now required only a 3/5 majority. Now, I mention this not because it's necessarily relevant to rules and regulations, the Senate.gov website, but because I want you to understand that I do actually pick up on these things, and I can tell when you're using resources that aren't approved for the class. I can tell when you're getting information online. And more than that, getting information online isn't always beneficial, right? When you're taking an exam and you go to a resource that I never gave you, there may be a reason I never gave you that resource. And on a timed test, you may skim through it too quickly, as you all seem to have done with the Senate article, and miss important details. Had you gone to our slides or the Crutz book and looked up the filibuster, you would have seen the proper number, 3/5. So anyway, apologies for that digression there, but rules like the cloture rule can help facilitate collective action by setting certain requirements for coordination. We know that jurisdiction can help solve collective action problems in Congress, just like the cloture rule can, right? Jurisdiction, for example, in Congress, refer to committees, right? Committees have different jurisdictions. So different committees will deal with different areas or issues in policy areas or issues, right? So the Transportation Committee is going to deal primarily with issues to do with transportation. Agriculture with, you guessed it, agriculture, right? Having different jurisdictions can help facilitate collective action by allowing people to specialize and also by facilitating log rolling agreements, right? Because if I'm on agriculture and I want something to get done that involves transportation, I know who to go to make a deal, and I know what I have that I can give them. Decisiveness. If one person can make a decision, that can help us solve collective action problems, right? Even if sometimes it's not one person, but a smaller group, that can help too, right? If someone can make a decision, we can sometimes avoid collective action problems. Agenda power and veto power can help. Agenda power, say in the Senate, is when, in the House, I should say. The House is when the Speaker of the House, not the Senate, the House, has a lot of agenda power. They are elected by majority of the chamber, which means they're always from the majority party, and they have power over a lot of what gets done in the House. This means that they can push the agenda of the majority party, right? That can help solve collective action problems in that we know whose agenda is going to be looked at. And we also know things like the media have agenda power, right? The media can tell us what issues are important in any given election year, and that's going to change how the campaigns have to behave. Veto power, obviously the classic example here is the presidential veto, right? Now, delegation, right? Delegation is another important way to solve collective action problems. Delegate power to someone. Delegate the decision making to someone, perhaps, right? So not one person has to know everything and do everything. In the case, say, of the bureaucracy, the president delegates a lot of his executive authority to different bureaucrats, different bureaucratic agencies in order to get things done. Because if the president had to deal with the day-to-day execution of every single law that the US has passed, he couldn't do that. He's one person. So he needs to delegate this responsibility so that it can actually get done. Likewise, we delegate our vote to our representatives, right? That's how elections work. We elect a representative to basically act on our behalf. We have delegated our vote to them. So these obviously examples start to hint at a problem that can arise from delegation, right? When we delegate our power, in the case of voting, or voice in the case of the president, his executive power, to someone else, this can result in a problem of agency loss, right? The person acting on our behalf doesn't always act the way we would like them to. So we lose some agency. Enforcement and oversight. One way to try to limit agency loss is if we can enforce things very specifically or oversee things. So Congress can oversee the bureaucracy to make sure that the laws they've written and passed are getting done the way they want them to get done. The president has oversight power over the bureaucracy. He can, for the most part, hire and fire any of the heads of department, right? Those political appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president. Though certainly the lower level civil service bureaucrats, there's a lot less oversight there, right? We know that leads to issues of agency loss, which is why we have such strict enforcement rules for how to enforce certain laws and how these civil servants actually do their jobs, right? Things like red tape. Certainly, from the agency loss standpoint of us delegating our vote, we lose some agency. This is why we have regular elections. This is why we have a free press, right? So we can oversee our elected officials. And if we feel we've lost too much agency, we can try to vote them out of office. So we implement all these solutions with institutions, right? All my examples of these solutions have involved institutions. The Senate and cloture, both chambers of Congress and jurisdiction with their committees. Decisiveness, agenda power, delegation, enforcement and oversight, all of these examples, I gave examples that involve institutions. So basically, to get anything done, we have to overcome collective action problems. And to overcome collective action problems, we need tools. And these tools can be implemented by institutions. These institutions make up our government.